Hello, everyone. I'm excited to welcome today David Caprara. He's a journalist who's based in Japan, in Nara Prefecture. And we've met each other through the US-Japan Council, and I am just in awe of his work because he's based in Japan and completely bilingual, but also working for major corporations in the US. And he's had a lot of amazing stories, which I'm excited to hear about. He's also been working in Nepal and Korea and some other exciting places as well. So thank you so much, David, for joining me today.
Thanks, Jody. And good to see you again.
Thank you so much. So if we could start by talking about where you were born and raised, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the U.S. and the state of Virginia. Through my life, I've kind of had a sample of many different sides of Virginia, never many different parts of Virginia. I was born in Fairfax, grew up the first chunk of my life in Alexandria, where both of my parents were working in D.C., but most of my life in Virginia was in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And yeah, quite a in terms of the kind of the cross-world connections and swirling there. I don't know if you and your viewers know much about Fredericksburg, but Fredericksburg, Virginia is kind of, historically in the U.S. where there's this kind of swirling of cultures where the North meets the South. That's true both in a historical sense and a very current sense with a lot of things going on in Virginia. Um, I had a lot of international friends growing up, but in my neighborhood, in Fredericksburg, there wasn't in the public school system too many people with like international background. Two of my best friends there were also named David, and all of our dads' names are David. It was very
Really?
confusing. So I started with the Japanese style very early. We referred to each other by last names. But one of them was an adopted Korean, Korean roots, and his grandmother, who was living in that house, walking distance from me, was actually a Japanese woman who was came here after the war, and just out of coincidence or goen, whatever you call it, his grandmother living there was her father was the Guji or the shrine priest of Kashihara Jingu in Nara, where I'm currently living in Nara, and then went on to be the shrine priest of Hanazona Jinja. So I kind of got early understandings of some of Japanese culture from her. Also, just kind of seeing the way that my friend the just kind of having these kind of different traditions and cultures exposed early on was kind of one early introduction to Japan. But I did a lot of travel also, I think starting from like high school and middle school level, I made some international trips. And it was just, yeah, just having these first experiences going to another country that was different from what I knew and grew up in. I remember going to Korea for the first time, and I had opened this drink that had like whole grapes in it. And I went back and I was telling my friends, in Korea they have these drinks with like these whole grapes, and the floors are heated. And in Japan, you wouldn't believe the convenience store ice cream there. And maybe it was these early simple kind of discoveries and kind of seeing how things are different. This is kind of superficial level with like ice cream and sweets as a kid, but I think maybe this is kind of the early beginnings of trying to visit a different place and bring these little snowballs back from the Himalaya or the North Pole to try to share with other people what life is like in other places.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for that. You said that you were interested in Japan and Korea already from that early age, but when did you start learning Japanese? Was it with the JET program that you went on, or did you study it in school as well?
Yeah, so I studied, French. I started in middle school, studied that through high school because it was one of the only languages available. And then I get to university, and just the momentum of already having that, I continued with French, and now I don't use it at all. I studied Arabic as well, and also don't really use it on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, Japanese for me began with the JET program. So I was interested in countries all around Asia through university and just out of personal interest. I got interested in different cultures throughout Asia and on meditation and in undergraduate. One of my majors was religious studies. I studied different forms of Buddhism throughout Asia. University of Virginia is very Tibet heavy. Japan program in particular was not very strong so much at UVA at the time. But my one of the classes I took there, this professor recommended this thing called the JET program. It's a great way to kind of dig in and get a really deep dive into Japan. And I spent a year backpacking around after university. I found myself kind of Googling, jobs and LinkedIn and things, and I was just thinking, this isn't really a way to uh, start a life. So I got a backpack. I backpacked around Nepal. I spent a lot of time there. I think the max tourist visa was 5 months, and I was thinking of just going for 2 weeks. I stayed for 5 months. I just had really incredible experiences there. But that's actually where I applied for JET was in Nepal. But then I did the JET program, and where I was placed is not far from where I am now in Nara Prefecture in a little town called Kawakami. And it was a very interesting region in Nara. I mean, Nara just has so much history. Anywhere you go, there's hundreds of years of history to be told, just every like, inch of Nara. But Kawakami, it is very remote and very extreme in terms of the rural depopulation and the view that you get in Japan. But because of that, it's almost like a different country than Tokyo and what you'd see there. And I'm so thankful for being placed there. While placed in Japan, a lot of the jets, this kind of thing that some jets listening or former jets listening might hear kind of over and over again in their heads is every situation is different and where you're placed in the program. Initially, a lot of the people in very rural areas would kind of look at people in the city placements and feel a little bit of, oh, they are kind of missing out. They have all of the fun in the cities. But it was actually quite the opposite for Jets here. Maybe there's this initial feeling of that, but it was in the countryside that Jets really had this strong sense of community. We would hang out all the time. And the Japanese culture that I was exposed to in Kawakami and in, this rural area of Nara really let me see slides of Japan that are both, endangered in terms of questioning how long these can continue on for, but also just some of the very uniquely Japanese and very proud to continue these traditions that have been going on for so long. So it was just amazing being able to, form relationships with these neighbors. I started with taiko. I didn't speak, any Japanese at the time really, but someone was just telling me, you should get involved with this taiko team. And it was through taiko drumming, this music being this kind of nonverbal language where you can convey more than you can convey in, any language that you're most fluent in. Really, just these different sides of what it means to be a human being, and just so much passion through this taiko team, and I'm still connected to these people today. I mean, really became like family. And if it wasn't for these early experiences in taiko, I probably never would have really had this feeling like this is kind of a sense of belonging here and the sense of family that I found here in Japan.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I also wanted to ask you about your interest in journalism. So it sounds like you've always been interested in history and in exploring culture and whatnot, but what led you to your interest in trying to capture that and then convey that to others through writing or photography or documentaries?
Yeah, I started with, I grew up in kind of millennial generation where, we didn't have smartphones growing up. So in high school, I had this sort of point and shoot camera, and for me, that was this kind of, a form of artwork to just kind of capture the daily things in life and kind of the beauty and the mundane. And it was also kind of this meditative practice of taking a moment to kind of slow down. And there's this idea in Zen Buddhism a lot of, the mindset that you're in when you capture art and make it into something. It's a way to maybe convey that to someone, a certain mental state, not just an image. So it was, for me, I was, photography was first an art form. I mentioned I did a bit of traveling after university. I was not involved in, following news so much. I didn't really know what I was getting myself involved in as much, but I went to Egypt. So basically, I wasn't reading the news so much, knowing what I was heading to, but I knew the nuts and bolts. But I did go to Egypt while Mubarak was getting thrown out during this revolution right after graduating. That was a very, interesting experience being there and kind of speaking with people there. But traveling around, I went to just different places all throughout Asia. Mongolia was another fascinating place. I think a lot of people don't get to so much. But encountering people with different mindsets and different worldviews. It started for me as like photography and blogging to try to share with other people what that was like. And it was through living here in Japan, I kind of continued blogging, and it was wondering maybe there's a way to make a career out of this. And I think that I met some people at that time while I was a jet. Someone just said, "You've got to meet this professor, David Hawley." I think he was the Los Angeles Times bureau chief in Beijing during the Tiananmen Square protests, and he had a lot of experience in Japan and throughout Asia, and just kind of hearing about the life that people further down the road live. I left Japan with the intention of, okay, this is a way to this blogging and everything is great, but I want to kind of really become an actual journalist working for media companies. So that's why I went back to the U.S. It wasn't that I felt I was done living in Japan per se. But this was a way I applied to journalism schools in the U.S., and this is where we met. Actually, my first job after JET program was with U.S. Japan Council as an intern with communications, working with you. And it was a short time, but I just met really interesting people like yourself that are dedicated to kind of bridging Japan and the U.S. and exploring the ties between that. And while I was working with U.S. Japan Council, I was I got into these journalism schools that I applied to, but I was kind of thinking about these different real connections that you're trying to share through journalism. And in the midst of all this, this was 2015, there was this huge earthquake in Nepal. And I thought about the time I had spent there, the 5 months, after university that I'd spent there, and what it means to be a journalist, what it means to learn how to be a journalist. And I was just thinking of nothing against formal education, but I was thinking that going there and telling these stories about making what the kind of impact that this had on the Nepali people and like a resilience that was taking place there on the ground. Um, this kind of made me think that it would be a good idea to go there and cover that rather than moving to New York for graduate school. So that's what I did. I abandoned my plans of journalism school in New York, and I went to Nepal and covered quite a bit of things there for different. Both the earthquake, I was kind of volunteering with this hand and reporting with this camera on this and this hand, building these temporary structure houses for people after the quake. But I did a lot of reporting with Vice, got a lot of different ideas for different stories from that time as well. I started, that's kind of where my freelancing began, was this kind of early stage there. And he did a lot of stuff in Nepal that was, unconnected to the earthquake. One was on the honey hunters of Nepal. We went to the Himalayas and did a documentary on these villagers, these Gurung villagers that will harvest these honey the size of like a kitchen table that are hanging on the side of these cliffs. And we would watch people kind of go down with these bamboo ropes and collect this honey like they've been doing for hundreds of years. And just another, a different country, but a different way to share ultimately this kind of common thread that I would say is in all of my reporting, that anywhere you go, human beings are ultimately the same at heart, but just very, different manifestations of what we're doing and the different beautiful ways that we choose to live on the planet. Being able to try to capture that somehow, it's the sort of the common thread.
And I love that philosophy, and I think it really shows. It really shows through your storytelling, as well as the fact that you're able to really assimilate and become a part of all these different cultures throughout the world. And I would love to hear your perspective as a journalist. So, how do you go into these communities that are often remote and rural, where they may not have seen a lot of foreigners or outsiders? Like, how do you build rapport with them so that they're welcoming and they show you all these different things?
Yeah, so some areas, in terms of being kind of on the farther reaches of different places, I mean, we've, especially so that Nepal honey hunter story was so remote that a lot of the Nepalis that we were with had difficult communicating because some of the people didn't speak Nepali. There was, in Nepal, there's over 200 spoken languages in that country. And a lot of people didn't know written language either, but you have these media companies wanting these signed release forms, and some of these villagers not knowing how to write any script. So we would sometimes get fingerprints in those situations, and but to answer your question, how to approach very rural or very different communities. um, I think it's the same anywhere. Anywhere in the world, the bottom line is respect and your intention. And it's my intention, no matter where I go, above all else, is to sort of sorry, there's something that fell behind me. But my intention anywhere that I go is to listen. That's above all else. I'm not talking. I'm not trying to build this story. It's to share with people. And the value that I see in journalism is twofold. I think, on one sense, why do I do this? It's to share with other people and to try to impart some kind of understanding with what's taking place in the world with others. But on the other sense, that first one is what media outlets are willing to fund. The second one, they'd probably never offer me a job, or anyone in the industry, for this other reason. But it's just for me. I mean, I love exploring these cultures, and I love giving people the opportunity to share their stories. I mean, sometimes even if the camera, we found out it wasn't rolling or something, I feel like there'd still be a benefit in that. I mean, just having heard this story and having had this person be able to tell their story. I mean, it's almost therapeutic for these people to be able to share what they're going through. But I think that as a journalist, you really set yourself apart if you're, above all, your main intention is, and your approach is, one of respect. I think it's, the industry has this demand where you have to leave where you're going with a certain finished product, and there's all this, this budget involved to get there. A lot of people kind of lose sense of the human element of this, and people become sort of characters in the story. And when you view people as characters and not as individuals, it's kind of dehumanizes this art that's supposed to be all about humanizing the world. So for me, I never try to lose sight of that, and that is something I try to do no matter where I go. At the end of the day, yeah, respect, respect, respect. That's kind of what I try to live by and do all my reporting with.
Thank you so much. I really love your way of thinking, and I'm sure all your audience members appreciate that as well. And I wanted to ask about what stories you're most proud of, if you don't mind. If you could name
Mhm.
one or two or a few, that'd be great.
Sure. After the earthquake, there was this kind of political tension on the border of Nepal. There's kind of this gray area. So borders are a quite very interesting place to tell stories. And this kind of border between Nepal and India, where people are not viewed as either, you're not fully Nepali or you're not fully Indian, and many people in this area are actually stateless citizens. And there was a lot of tension that could be, the subject of an entirely different podcast. I'll try to keep short, but reporting on these kind of fight for rights in these areas was something I did a lot of reporting on. In this, it's called the Tarai, this region of Nepal, and I'm proud of that kind of early reporting, where there were a lot of killings in protest taking place, and seeing the way that foreign media was reporting on this, that was reliant, because of these language barriers, was reliant on locals, to tell these stories. But seeing the way in which, if you're reporting on underprivileged communities, that it might be that there's a certain bias that comes about through hiring local people on the ground who are only able to get these positions of power between, through the sort of local privilege of being in a higher caste or a higher economic status. So kind of, I noticed, the importance of being on the ground and really, seeing things with your own eyes. Right after this, being in Nepal, I reported, and I went to Greece in 2015. In the news recently, Syrian President Assad is just taken out of power. 2015 was sort of one of the peaks of the civil war that was taking place there, and the beginning of this huge migration, and that many people from the Middle East were coming into Europe at that time. So I went to, around different countries in Europe, and went to kind of the doorstep where this was taking place in Greece, to Lesbos, this small island in Greece, near Turkey, and on the border of Macedonia, or Macedonia and Greece, in this small town called Idomeni. So there was 10,000 refugees based there at the time along this barbed wire fence, and they weren't being let through, to continue to other countries in Europe. And speaking French and Arabic, very elementary Arabic, I wanted to kind of speak with people and understand what they were going through and the different paths that they were on and these migrations and journeys. And yeah, but partly out of not having the budget and a sponsorship from a media outlet, but also just wanting to understand people on a deeper level. I camped out there with these communities, and was kind of making an attempt to really embed and try and tell the stories of these people. So many media outlets were covering this at the time. It was difficult to sort of pitch, but on kind of an emotional level, and also just kind of getting started in journalism, that was something I felt made a huge impact on me and the people I was reporting on. Maybe another story that comes to mind, the other one that I'll mention, is the story that sort of consumed my life for the longest amount of time and became much more than just a story, but sort of, kind of became my life, was researching this B-29 crash that had taken place in the village I was living in Nara. So I heard from a neighbor that there was an engine that was found in this hill, and I was thinking, like, what engine? When was this? And he said that a plane had gone down during World War II, but he didn't know any details. So I, Googled this, didn't find anything on, through a Google search that motivated me to kind of dig deeper. I did, filed requests with the U.S. National Archives, and I found that, not an easy process, but over the course of months, I found hundreds of pages of documents connected to this crash, and I uncovered this amazing story of this plane that had gone down. It was here, American B-29 that had flown over Japan for the bombing of Osaka. And on the way back to Saipan, where they had taken off from, the plane had taken some flak over Osaka and crashed into the side of this Buddhist holy mountain, Mount Omine, here in Nara. And 4 individuals were able to parachute out, and I was able to, kind of learn what happened with their story. I met people on the ground here in Japan today that saw this take place when they were young elementary school students, that saw these U.S. airmen, and uncovered these really amazing stories where these crewmen were here to bomb Japan, and in the aftermath of being caught here. Before being taken into POW camp, there was this incredible kindness shown to them by some of these local villagers, where one person knew that they would have quite a difficult time if they were passed to police or the village immediately. So they actually took them into their house and fed them strawberries that they had grown in their garden. One local doctor had healed one of these soldiers, seeing that he was burned after the crash. And again, going back to this theme that we're told these narratives that there might be certain people on the planet that are so different from us, or enemies, or just there's the category of the other. But if you meet this other anywhere you go on planet Earth, this is the kind of thing that makes wars quite difficult to fight, when you realize that at the end of the day, everyone is the same at heart, and we're all humans cut out of the same material. So. This story for me was, very moving on an emotional level, being able to kind of share this and what had taken place and learn about all this. But B, the further you get from World War II, or any point in time, you have less people alive, just out of the nature of people passing away, and there being a less so population sample of this. However, you also have this increasing technology that's taking place and the reporting methods that are available. uh, documents that were top secret were made public documents if you know how to search for them. Addresses of individuals in the U.S. U.S. has laws, privacy laws, where addresses, and of individuals can be public information. And finding there's this huge movement of digitization now of all of these archival newspapers in the U.S. Very far from complete. The U.S. National Archives, hardly anything is digitized, but there is this very slow movement towards digitizing things, which does still take a human being to physically scan every one of these documents, which is why it's moving so slow. But I was able to track down of the 11 crewmen that had were on this aircraft, all family members of all of them, and meet in
Wow.
person,
Wow.
individuals that didn't know the details exactly of, how their brother, their father, their grandfather had passed away, and there was a lot of really moving things that came out of that. And that actually went on to be. I worked with a producer that I worked with while I was working with NHK in New York, and we worked together to produce a documentary on this on NHK World, which is called "The Fallen Fortress." If you're interested, it can be watched for free online. But yeah, that's NHK World. But yeah, just kind of that is definitely the story that maybe consumed my life the most in terms of investment and time, and still not over. Still, and this year is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So some loose ends being tied up with that as well.
Mm-hmm. And it really seems like it was meant to be that you were the one who heard about this, and you came from the U.S., but you also came to this very mountain where the B-29 crashed, and the fact that you were able to find family members is so moving because, as you said, I think it's a really amazing timing where some of the confidential documents are becoming more public, but also some of the family members are still alive, and so I'm sure they really, really appreciated your effort.
Yeah, and it's just these sort of coincidences that take place in life that will sometimes give you goosebumps of how just wild some of these coincidences are. I've stopped getting surprised. I'm just, this is kind of a funny mind. Like this is like, of course, this is this crazy things. It's just that if you got to kind of raise your antenna and be aware of all the different connections about around you.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned that you had worked for major news organizations before, but I assume that working freelance, it gives you a little bit more time in order to explore and to dig deep into passion projects. And I'm sure, of course, you do still have to make a living, so it's a difficult balance. But I think for a lot of journalists, they would think that you're living the dream, living abroad in a place of your choice and still working for all these major news corporations. So would you have any advice for any budding journalists who are interested in that sort of lifestyle?
Whatever you're doing, I think my advice is to just try and like put in the time. There's this idea of like 10,000 hours is how long it takes to be kind of proficient in any sort of thing. So, in whatever kind of way you think is appropriate and will get you somewhere, put in the time and do the thing. And for me, yeah, I mentioned mostly about all the freelance stuff that I've done and the way I've got started and what I'm doing now. For me, traditional media roles also played a big role in that. There are advantages of working for institutions. You have this backing. If I don't think that we'll ever see. YouTubers and influencers being the ones that are, filling all of the seats in the White House press corps room or at the UN. I mean, there's traditionally been some interesting examples where they've opened up, but I do think that working for a mainstream media outlet does give you access that it might be a lot more difficult to have as a freelancer, especially true in Asia and in Japan with the Keisha Club and the different types of kind of restrictions that you might have as a freelancer. My first traditional media roles were in New York. I worked with all Japanese media, but it was Tokyo Shimbun and Shunichi Shimbun, which are kind of the same parent company. I worked for those and getting started in print, and then I moved across the street, literally just a few blocks away, working for NHK in New York, and it taught me a lot about how to be the kind of dedication that and having other people that are really pushing you and driving you to do things that working on your own you might not have that education, and having senpai or people that know more than you or have been in the field longer to kind of learn from is a valuable experience. It was fascinating working for Japanese media, so essentially a foreign correspondent in my own country, in the U.S. This was in 2016 when there was President Trump had won the first time, and it was just kind of America was all this sort of division, all these things taking place, and we were going around the country basically trying to explain to Japanese viewers what America is, and all these different slices of life. And when people would ask, what media outlet are you? Are you left or right? And they try to figure you out. When you tell them you're working for Japan's public broadcaster, it immediately disarmed them. Where it's this is just someone who is trying to understand. So I do think that foreign journalists working in the U.S. really do have an advantage in that sense of being able to kind of show a sense of neutrality that might not exist with a domestic outlet. And but yeah, I mean, I've seen the benefits of that. My career has kind of been one of alternating between working for traditional outlets and then going towards freedom, and kind of this jellyfish contraction and relaxing movement of swimming through the media sea. Companies are evolving and coming and going all the time. My most recent kind of semi-full-time permalance is a word that's used, but I was working with CBS News in their Tokyo bureau, and the bureau closed after close to 60 years, over 50
Oh
years of being
no.
based in Japan. So they
Oh,
no longer have a presence in Japan after 50 plus years. I guess Asia is not important.
wow.
It's really it's you with all of these changes in the field, you identify yourself less with a company as much as an individual in this effort, and you have to ask yourself these tough questions. What is it that I'm doing as a journalist, and what is this common thread? If it's not the ship of this company, what is this thing that's staying afloat and moving forward? And you have to develop this sort of buoyancy and this sort of resiliency of certain ideals and values that kind of keep you afloat and keep you driving, that just can't sink.
No, I really appreciate what you just said. And just to comment on some of the things that I found surprising, like I didn't realize that being a foreign journalist is an advantage in this era of political division in the US. And that made me think earlier you were talking about putting a human face on the other. And I think that's really important, especially with so many big wars going on in different areas of the world. And I'm sure that's all the more important to report what's actually going on, as well as the voices of the local people. I just didn't realize that that's probably necessary within the country, within the U.S. as well at this point. And there's a lot of work to be done for sure. Um, but just to continue on, among the different countries that he lived in, why did you decide to choose Yoshino in Nara Prefecture? And if you wouldn't mind describing a little bit about the house that you're living in, kominka, which I think is a movement that's really gaining more and more traction in Japan. So yeah, if you could describe a little bit about that.
Sure. So when I was in Jet here, the first time, well, not the first time, the only time, when I was in Jet, I had found that in Kyoto they were doing these TEDx Kyoto talks, and I went there and I attended the talk of a man named Alex Kurt, who is an individual that's been in Japan for vast majority of his life. I think the 50s or the 60s is when he came here as a child. And he gave this talk about reforming this farmhouse that he had found in the Iya Valley in Shikoku, and the kind of history and the love that he spent doing that, and just kind of hearing about his story. I mean, it just completely changed my life, and I just felt like this guy's doing something amazing, and just kind of really valuing these traditional houses of Japan. This word kominka, I don't know if it's been put in the English dictionary yet, but it's certainly it's a big buzzword that's been going around. Kominka, and this other word akiya. Akiya means abandoned house. It's this huge crisis in Japan right now, where over 13% of all houses in Japan are abandoned. There are this other word kominka, which means the kominka means basically old house, but these old traditional style buildings of houses that have been in Japan for hundreds of years are just these incredible building structures. And I went back to work in New York for 3 years, and while there working for Japanese media companies, I was just kind of thinking, like the whole time. I can't go back to the past and be a jet, but I mean, I couldn't really shake the feeling like I had a home in Japan, and that just the lifestyle here, the kind of culture of respect, and just how everything in Japan works. Coming from the U.S., where a lot of things don't work. I mean, like it just felt like a really nice place to live with really great people, and that is kind of what made me want to come back here. Also, the diversity both in Japan and in Asia. I mean, I think that one kind of thing that I found is just in this small area, there's so many different countries in the Asia Pacific region of these very diverse cultures, and seeing a move to Japan as not necessarily being a move to Japan, but a move to the Asia Pacific neighborhood is kind of another idea. Japan is around the size of the U.S. state of California, but it is just so much history and culture and diversity of these local histories and cultures to explore that I just feel like you can't exhaust in a lifetime. And it's probably the only place that I've felt it to that degree, where I always have more to learn, and that every day can be sort of a learning experience to learn something new. That's kind of what brought me back here, and recognizing that a lot of stories told about Japan and Asia are very kind of superficial. Oh, China's scary, or oh, Japan's strange, or these kind of very superficial and not very authentic ways of storytelling. I mean, I found some pretty deep slices of life here that I felt were worth sharing, and that's kind of what made me want to come back. Now, the idea of kominka and why Yoshino, why this kominka that I'm speaking to you in right now. There's so many different parts of this. One is that it's just these houses are beautiful, and there is a lot of these areas where these kominka are under threat of rural depopulation. And there was a report released last year that over 40% of all municipalities in Japan are under threat of extinction. So, I mean, it is really just kind of a threat of a lot of these areas kind of turning into ghost towns if there aren't new people moving into them. But one thing that I've recognized is there are new people moving into these villages. Maybe not enough to displace and completely offset the rural depopulation that has taken place, but there's the low cost of housing out here. The average cost of a house last year in the United States, I believe, was over 450,000 US dollars. Here in Japan, a lot of these kominka are selling for 20,000 USD, 50,000 USD. I mean,
Wow.
very under 100,000 USD, you can live in a very beautiful and already livable house. And that kind of turned things upside down for me. And I found that, working in the U.S., especially, recently, there's a lot of data that shows it's just a lot harder to get by on planet Earth now than it used to be in previous generations. I mean, the baby boom. I'm not a determinist and fatalist, going to complain about my situation, but the fact is, it was a lot easier to live the dream of having a house and a stable job that you could depend on for decades, that offered a pathway for growth within that. It just felt like a lot of that is gone. And in the U.S., nothing against the U.S. I love the life that I lived there. I still go back and consider that a big part of my identity. But I felt, a lot of ways like kind of treading water and running on this treadmill and kind of wondering if you're ever really going to get a sense of footing. And it felt in many ways kind of reactive, working for someone else to try to, build this little island for yourself that you can stand on. In Japan, I found that, through this kominka movement, the beautiful architecture, the beauty of these communities and everything, being one part of it. But outside of that, from an economic sense, this idea of, after, for the last 100 years, I mean, I think that, most of us have had family, 1800s and for like hundreds and thousands of years, were like agricultural peasants living in different countries. And the 1900s was this big movement where people felt that moving to the city, was this way to escape that. And, there's this huge move away from these kind of rural areas all around the globe in the 1900s, and to succeed and to excel meant to be in the dynamo or be in the hive where like everything is happening. And now with remote work, especially, and with freelance work in media, and just kind of the shifts of the workforce, the shifts, the security that is offered through living in a city, or maybe not offered as much as it used to be, I find that people are able to take charge and kind of be their own dynamo rather than moving to the center of where things are. And that's what I saw moving to Japan as rural Japan in particular, was this ability to live in a very unique area with very unique history and these very beautiful communities of people where, we live in an era now where we can choose where we want to live and bring our work for a lot of different industries. And yeah, I mean, that's something that I felt in many ways to kind of be a very empowering thing. And I find that in the past 5 to 10 years, it's incredible how many people I've met, both Japanese and non-Japanese, that have moved to Japan's countrysides to sort of, both live in these fantastic communities that have hundreds of years of history, and to also kind of take charge and feel like they have some ground to stand on. I kind of see different parts of that, and that these buildings are just fantastically beautiful. I mean, I've met people that have just come to tears crying, talking about how they will, look at the different ways this wood joinery would come together. And it was this kind of experience of being able to like meet the carpenters that built these traditional houses with this shiguchi wood joinery, and just feeling like they were, interacting with and meeting these, the people that build these houses that are, mostly built out of, natural materials that go right back to the earth. And it just feels like Japan's doing a lot right. I, to try to be a part of that in any way I could, felt right as well for me.
Hmm. Thank you so much. And it's really comforting to learn that there are places where, yeah, you can feel like unity with nature and with the community and et cetera. And but at the same time, really bring this global perspective that you have, and to be able to work as a journalist. And I'm sure you have to commute a lot to Tokyo and Osaka and other areas as well. But the fact that you have this great balance in your life sounds really grounding. And I was wondering, would you be able to stay there, or do you think you might move around to other areas in the region, Asia Pacific region, or do you have any plans for the future?
Yeah, Japan, where I am now is, the remote area in the hills of Yoshino. But no matter where you are in Japan, you're never really that remote. So I'm just a little over an hour, hour and a half from Osaka by train, and that international airport being right there. If I need to go somewhere, I mean, the idea from a journalistic standpoint of where I am now. Um, I'm not in Yoshino as much as I am Japan or the Asia Pacific, and this is kind of a hub for me, where I'm able to kind of travel wherever I need to go. And so, yeah, I mean, I do feel like I'm able to, travel throughout Asia where as needed, and throughout Japan as needed. I do go to Tokyo quite a bit, and wherever I kind of need to be for storytelling. Um, I do, I am also, my parents are in the U.S., and I do spend a lot of time kind of going back and forth to the U.S. Um, and yeah, I mean, in terms of Yoshino, though, I mean, I always, I do think I'll always have a foot here, whether or not it's, full time every day of the month living here. I do think that it's, life has many chapters, and I'll kind of take life one year at a time. But right now, yeah, it is kind of my primary base when I'm not out, reporting. And yeah, I mean, I like it here. It's nice. It's nice. Nice place to live.
Mm-hmm. And I really love the way you think that it's really a chapter because when we think about moving, where do we want to be based, etc., I think oftentimes it's such a big decision that you think, oh, you really have to, what if I need to determine like where to stay for the rest of my life, etc. But it's not
Mhm.
like that, that you can take it easy and see how things go.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have any advice for others who might be struggling finding their career or where they want to be based, really big life decisions like that. If people who are interested in working globally, would you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think my main advice is to just kind of, follow what you think is right for you. I mean, everyone is kind of on their own path, and I don't know if there's a cookie cutter way of, living life and doing what's right. But it's just, for me, I've been, this word in Japanese, goen, these connections that you feel with the world. And I'm 100% go en ugoki mono. I mean, I'm like moving to just following places where I feel connections and things that life just kind of feels the deepest living in a certain area or trying a different um, you know way of living. For other people, I would prescribe the same thing. I think that whatever feels right for you, not forcing yourself to like live internationally if you like living where you're living. But if I mean, the world is increasingly much more global, easy to live a global life than it used to be in the past. Hopefully, flights will go down as technology increases. That's still one thing that we have to catch up. But I mean, what we're doing now, I guess we're both still in Japan. But I mean, I do this, calling my parents all the time and being able to keep in touch like that. Also, just feeling like you're not in remote or in another country or something, just the way that technology has kind of enabled us to stay together. I think that it's there's a lot of challenges with like a visa of living in another country, and where kind of the technicalities, maybe the kind of the work that you want to get involved in isn't something you can do remotely. That adds a lot of barriers too. But trying to, maybe think of places that do work in ways where you could work. I mean, for me, the nuts and bolts and the practical side of thing is something I kind of try to figure out after the fact. I mean, before that, it's like, what's the deeper goal, and then how you get there and how you connect all that dots is something that if there's a will, there's a way kind of mentality. And yeah, so far, it's been working for me. So I guess that's what I'd recommend.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's the perspective of having technology, and to really, it's all about your mentality, like where you are based is important, but also the fact that you can make the effort to communicate as much as you can and feel like others can rely on you, even if they're far away. I think that's so important. So thank you for that. Okay, I think that kind of covers everything that I wanted to ask at this point. But is there anything that you'd like to add?
Um, yeah, not in particular. I mean, I just think that yeah, life is short but it's also long. So there's a rush, but there's no rush, and you should get out there and do all the things. I think that it's just amazing the kind of people you cross paths with, and the people you expose yourself to if you're willing to. To the degree to which you're willing to put yourself out there. So I think that above security and sort of feeling like you might tarnish your resume if you do a certain path or do a certain thing. I mean, think about how you can make the most impactful and the best sort of impact you can on the world while you're here, and try to live according to that. I mean, see where it takes you. We've all got uh, very interesting potentials in us, so get out there and do all the things.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That's been really helpful.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Yuri.